Alright, so just a couple days after the Capitol insurrection on January 6th, I made a video that was titled, "Don't Let Joe Biden Use This Moment as an Opportunity to Expand the Police and Their Surveillance State." And the reason why I made that video was pretty simple, okay? We know who Joe Biden is, one of the main proponents of the Patriot Act, and we know that using these moments of crises when Americans are scared, they will jump on this opportunity to do exactly that. And predictably, this is exactly what's happening right now. Now, a little bit less predictably, and maybe this was naive of me, I did not think that the squad was going to simply roll over and let this happen. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happened in this situation. Now, I don't really like making these videos criticizing the squad because it sucks. They're supposed to be the people that are on the inside that are fighting alongside our agenda, but they continue to have absolutely no strategy whatsoever in order to fight for our agenda and get it passed. And that's why we have to keep making videos like these. So basically, Congress passed and authorized what's called the Emergency Security Supplemental, which is basically just a giant handout to the Capitol Police and National Guard in response to their absolute failure for what they did on January 6th. So let's go ahead and read about this, how it passed, what's in it, and who allowed this to happen. So basically, U.S. House Democrats barely passed a $1.9 billion bill to fund security measures on Capitol Hill Thursday after progressive lawmakers objected to the premise of the legislation that the Capitol Police and other security personnel need additional funding to better protect federal buildings in the wake of the January 6th insurrection. The Emergency Security Supplemental, which passed in a 213 to 212 vote, okay, it passed by one vote, includes $43.9 million for Capitol Police, $521 million to the National Guard, and $250 million for security improvements to the Capitol grounds. So I read through a lot of this bill, and none of this is justified. Absolutely none of this is justified. The only thing that I could think that could possibly be justified is this $4.4 million for wellness and trauma support, including 6 new mental health counselors and wellness resilience specialists for $2.5 million to reimburse for U.S. Marshal Service for trauma support. So I'm a big fan of health and wellness and making sure people have access to that type of stuff, but that's the only thing in this entire bill that I think was justifiable to increase spending on. And even that, you don't need an extra $4.4 million. Your budget is already fucking gigantic. The Capitol Police have one of, if not the single largest police budget in the entire country. So they already have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. So this is not needed at all whatsoever. It's not a funding problem. It's not a resource problem. They already have heaps of cash. And as we saw on January 6th, it wasn't a funding problem. They had the resources at their disposal. They were just not using them. They had the intelligence at their disposal. How do I know that? Because I knew what was going to happen on January 6th. Obviously, nobody knew that they were going to storm the Capitol in the way that they did, but it was very obvious. They were telegraphing this on social media sites that they were planning something and that Capitol security should probably be beefed up on this day. And yet they completely weren't prepared for that, and that was a choice that they made. It was not a problem of a lack of resources. So everything else in this bill, I think, is completely unjustified. Now, how did this happen? So here are the people who basically allowed this to be pushed through. So the 3 Democrats who voted against the bill, okay, were Representatives Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Cori Bush of Missouri, and Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. Okay, so those are the ones who get some credit because they managed to vote against this bill. Now, the 3 Democrats who voted present, allowing this to pass, were Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Jamal Bowman of New York, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. They are all members of the so-called squad, and I like that phrasing, a group of the most liberal lawmakers in the House. So I like how they use the phrasing so-called squad because it is no squad, okay? You can't call yourselves a squad if you're not voting as a block. This is very simple. Okay, your one job as the progressives in the House, as the only group of progressives in the House that can have the potential to wield any leverage at all over the legislative process, your job is to form a cohesive voting bloc and then use that leverage in order to pass our agenda, or at the very least, to block some of the establishment's agenda. And they have not done this literally ever. I have never seen them deploy this strategy. We just had an interview a couple weeks ago, I think it was, where Cori Bush basically said that the mindset that they were using is that every one of them votes alone and that they vote their conscience and they vote as an individual. First of all, they're cowards because they didn't even vote at all. If anything, go ahead and vote for it. AOC, Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, if you're going to vote present and take the coward's way out, you might as well just go and vote for it because that's essentially what you're doing. You're allowing this to pass by voting present. So they didn't even have the guts to stand for the position that they actually were supporting in this instance. But again, it's totally void of strategy to vote as individuals. Why the fuck are they even called the Squad? They shouldn't be called the Squad. Okay, they're just a sprinkling of some progressive lawmakers who like to virtue signal on Twitter and who barely ever vote for the things that they say that they believe in. And when they do that, they do it in a fractionalized way so that we can't actually advance the agenda at all. So what this tells me is they still are completely unwilling to challenge Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer in any way. Okay, they don't want the public fight. They don't want to have to actually stand for anything, even though this is a very simple argument. Okay, there's no justification for increased funding for the Capitol Police, the National Guard, or any of that. Anyone who looked at what happened on January 6th would understand it's not an intelligence problem. It's not a security problem. Okay, again, we all witnessed the Black Lives Matter protests. I went to a Black Lives Matter protest down at the CNN Center here in Atlanta, where they had better defense for the CNN Center than they had for the fucking Capitol while they were certifying the election results. And they knew that the Stop the Steal rally was coming. So it's not an intelligence, it's not a security problem. Okay, we've seen firsthand what it looks like when they want to protect private property. And yet, when it comes to protecting the Capitol, then suddenly there was a lapse in judgment and nobody was prepared for this, even though it was entirely easy to predict that that was going to happen. So this is a situation that we have right now. The Squad is completely useless. I'm sorry, but that's just a fact, okay? Sometimes they come out, they have these good speeches, they shift the Overton window. That's a good thing. I like if they are bringing people over to the left who are to agree with our policy positions, but at some point, okay, now the people agree with us on our policy. They already agree. The overwhelming majority of the American people already agree with us on the policy, and yet they're not willing to actually use the levers of power in Congress in order to advance that agenda. What is the point of bringing people over to the left if we're not then going to follow through on the fight? Okay, so the domain where the Squad, where progressives and leftists in Congress have power is the public domain. Okay, we're not going to win these backroom negotiating battles with Nancy Pelosi. Okay, she wins at the Machiavellian politics. That's just her specialty. We win when we take the fights public. We win when we're willing to stand up against her. And you have this bloc in Congress that has the power to block legislation like this, and they stand up and do it. Okay, so, I mean, listen, this is where the Squad is at right now, and it's really disappointing, and it sucks, and there's really no excuses. So if we're actually going to end up pushing back against the establishment, if we're actually going to end up getting some of our policy priorities through, then a total change of strategy needs to happen. And I don't know if this is just because none of the people in Congress right now have the ability to be a leader on these things, or if it's that they genuinely just don't want to fight for these things, or if they're somewhat of cowards. But I don't know how else you interpret these types of situations, because there are clear points of leverage. It passed by 1 vote, and 3 of them voted present. At least vote for it if you believe in it. If you believe in letting this pass through, at least have the balls to go and vote for it. So it's honestly just pathetic. I hate that this is where we're at. Again, I don't even like making videos like these because it's so fucking obvious that it shouldn't need to be said. Yes, if you're going to be the progressive Squad, you have to vote as a squad in order to wield any sort of leverage. Instead, they just roll over for the entire establishment agenda, and then they go and they virtue signal on Twitter and they say, I really wish that this didn't happen. I mean, listen, I don't know what else there is to say about this. So there's no excuses. Even the people who voted present came out and said, oh, I don't really support this. I think it's a false premise. But you voted present. You didn't stop this bill from passing. So it's on your hands. You have culpability. You have responsibility for these things. And at the behest and at the allowal of these progressive lawmakers, these so-called Squad, this bill is going to pass. And so Joe Biden and the establishment gets to expand the security in the police state for absolutely no reason, with absolutely no justification. And it's all because the Squad has absolutely no strategy.